With Laulima Tools. I'm Gloria Niles, the Director of Distance Education, and I'm here with Yasmin Romero. And she is the recipient of the Laulima Innovation Award for 2019. And so we're here to talk about some of the innovative strategies that you use in particularly your online courses through Laulima. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
To start this off, I'm going to talk generally about how I approach creating a site, an online course. And then I'm going to talk about how some of the strategies that I've used in order to keep students engaged, to create as authentic as possible feedback cycles with students as well, between me and the students, as well as between students and students. Mm-hmm. And so in general, what I find to be very successful when developing an online course is organization. And I think that making sure it's accessible is incredibly important. So being organized really makes that accessibility easy for students. So easy for students to navigate the site and things like that. And actually, I've even, in my online course this semester, I did an online video that walked students through the different components of the course. So not only Laulima, the site, but also our workbook, because students have to do a workbook each week, in which I comment individually on each of their workbooks. And then I did this because I had some students asking at the end of evaluations, like, I understand that we had all this different tech, but it took me a bit to get adjusted to. So maybe there's a way to get students to sort of know how to navigate the platform.
Right.
And I think sometimes it's easy to take to think that maybe students should know already, since they have so many classes using Laulima.
Right.
But each instructor uses it in different ways.
Yes.
And the way that has been the most successful for me, as I said, was organization, but especially color coding. See here. So as you can see here, different sections are highlighted. So for example, navigating your weekly modules, each of the modules titles or like major aspects are put into green. And then I have keywords in yellow, I have due dates in purple, and I have orange for important, as well as red for links. And I would be willing to adjust those colors if a student, for example, was colorblind. That's not something that I've run into, but that is something that I'm thinking about changing the colors coding for next time.
Yeah, that's part of the accessibility guidelines. Another option might be to change the font to white. Easier
to follow. Okay. And so I have everything split into what exactly shows on our course calendar. And what I generally do is I introduce students to the units, and I describe the units because I want students to be aware that each unit has objectives, and I want them to be able to know what that means, in the sense that what we're working towards in the class. And I do this with all my courses, not just online, but face-to-face and hybrid. And I found it to be really useful. So as you can see here, I have Unit 1. It introduces them to the study of language, gender, and sexuality. I have Unit 2, investigating gendered and sex categories in conversation and writing. And then I have Unit 3, researching in language, gender, and sexuality studies. And so these are kind of accessible titles, and at the same time, they're also just short descriptions about what we're going to do in class and why. And so that creates a very transparent, my expectations are then transparent to the students and vice versa. For my modules, what I do generally is I also have a section at the very beginning that tells them what our weekly goal is. Again, this is just reiterating what is on the course calendar, what's in the syllabus, but making those connections in case the student hasn't read as closely the syllabus or hasn't read the course calendar very closely, this still reiterates it. And then why does it matter? I feel like it's really important to explain why we're doing things because students need to understand the stakes. And so I feel like I always have to explain why I'm doing something.
I think it's great to have to reiterate the objectives for each module, and because students see them in the syllabus at the beginning, but they're just there as a list, and so it's really great to connect them. module by module.
Yeah, and I actually found it helps to improve or strengthen my teaching because it keeps me held accountable for each week as well, which I think is really important to demonstrate to your students too, that you are aware of what the objectives are and everything that you're doing is teaching towards those goals.
So question, when you are creating a course, do you start by mapping that out, like the objectives to the activities to the assessment, to see how those are all connected?
Yes, and I usually do that by going backwards. So I scaffold with what are the major projects, and then I think about, okay, so because I have my objectives listed, and I look at them, and then I think about, okay, what 3 major projects could I assign? So for example, with 441, their final project is actually recording natural conversation, analyzing using discourse analysis, which most of the students have not had any experience with, and then in writing a research paper on that. And so that's their final end of semester, but how do I get them there?
Yeah.
And so there's 2 other aspects to the course. First is the linguistic problem, which I'm going to talk about in a second, because it really is one way for me to create a feedback cycle with my students. And so linguistic problem is one, and then another is their weekly workbook, which helps to support them as they're working and navigating through the new terms, the different ideas, and the different methodologies. And so
it sounds kind of what I call a sandwich approach to the instructional design, where you have the objectives and you have the major assessments, the summative assessments, and then you fill in between the contents of the sandwich, so to speak, with the activities that bridge those together.
Yes. And I try to make links constantly. And so as you can see in the assignment list, like we work backward, it starts from the very top with the final project, but everything that they're working on works towards that. So they have to practice recording themselves as well as other people conversing. Then they have to transcribe that recording. Then they have to do it again for their final project. And so it's just these different steps. And then how they translate into, so then another aspect is the problem. So linguistic problems are basically, I give students a data set and they have to analyze that data set. And so here, week 3, they had their problem 8, in which students had to analyze a conversation between a mother and child talking about dinosaur eggs. And so they posted their responses to the questions, and this is from their textbook. And then students had to respond to the questions. They had to respond to their peers, give them feedback. Then I read through their feedback, and on week 4, I responded by having a podcast in which I talk about and comment on their discussions of the linguistic problem. And so I feel like this accomplishes 2 things. Number 1, it keeps students aware that discussion forums matter. And I feel like that's something that's really important in an online course and a hybrid course. When you assign a discussion forum post, students will do the bare minimum and generally will not engage as fully as you feel like they could in an in-class discussion. So number 1, they know that I'm reading it. Number 2, I'm commenting on their stuff. I'm commenting on what they can strengthen as they revise the draft to submit to me. And so in this way, it's that feedback cycle. They get peers first, then they get me. And they have 5 of these linguistic problems throughout the semester that prepares them for that final project in which they have to do their own analysis.
So these are formative assessments, pretty much.
Yeah,
that prepare them for. And so I would assume that in the module, you've had examples that show them how to do the process.
How to navigate. In their workbooks, they actually are already working with data.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what they model it after. And then this first this first linguistic problem, I've commented individually as well when they give me the second draft. And this first problem is not graded. So that they know what the expectations are. And then I actually met with them for conferences after, over the phone or by Skype, and was able to talk with them about their strengths and then also things that they need to improve upon.
But I think what I'm getting at is did you provide a video with an example of how to do a linguistic problem?
I didn't, because we've been doing them in the workbooks.
In the workbook.
So you
sort of
back
scaffolded it
Yeah.
through the workbook. I got it.
Yeah. And the workbooks have been really successful. I created them. It took me about 2 weeks, but they really help to make students look at data, look at the content they're reading, and respond to it. And then I individually respond to all their workbooks. And so 357, my rhetorical theory class, also has a workbook, also is split up into these different sections. And another thing that I have found that is important when you're teaching using Laulima or any online platform is trying to make it relevant. And so that relevance is important in the sense, what skills and strategies and tech can I teach my students? And what can I also teach myself?
Right.
Because I think it's important as someone who is constantly navigating different modes and mediums to sort of become more familiar with things that have emerged, new recording platforms or things like that. And so I try to teach myself at least one new tech each semester, and I found that to be the best balance. And then also use 3 technological tools or platforms for each class.
Right. Yeah.
And
so that is a good strategy, because it keeps things, something new for you to learn each semester, but not overwhelming you or the students with too much technology.
Because too much tech can really overwhelm.
Well, I think then they're, like you had commented on the students' comments on the evaluation, you don't want students spending too much of their cognitive energy on trying to figure out how to use the technology, because that's less time that they're spending on the content of the course. Yeah.
And I also want to make the tech that they do use relevant to their projects in class. So for example, in 357, we're going to start making our group public service announcements. So they have to practice using a recording platform. I recommend Audacity, but students have also come to me and said, well, I want to use this different recording software. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I think it's really important for you to listen to your students and hear what they're skilled in and what they're comfortable in, and have them develop upon that. And so they're going to do that, and then they're going to record their own TED Talk. So these different steps prepare them for that. Okay, and then in addition, I have also used tech to do discussion forums in a different way, in which I had students do their discussion forums by recording themselves. And so this was here. So instead of students posting their text responses, they posted their recordings. And so that was a really interesting moment. A lot of students commented on how it was, at the same time, they had already done a presentation at the beginning where they recorded themselves the 3rd week, and they felt that really taught them a lot about how they speak, what they sound like, what strategies they should use to be more convincing or persuasive. And then when I had them do the discussion forum, it kind of changed into a different way that you can actually have a recorded conversation with somebody. And so that was kind of an interesting thing to try, but also help to support them as they're figuring out what tech they want to use for their final project, which was multimodal. They could choose from multiple different modes in order to promote the rhetoric and composition track at Western World.
So it sounds like you're teaching them multimedia skills along with the content.
Yes. And I think it's really important to not let the tech skill drive the actual teaching.
But it supports it.
And so using different tech has really been successful for me. And getting students to buy in. I know that some students have written me and said, well, do I really have to record this? Can I just submit a paper? And my response to that is no. And I try to explain to them that I'm asking them to participate in a new modality because the class is not only drawing upon traditional genres, but also non-traditional genres. So for example, in my Humanities 300 class, students are interviewing faculty at West Oahu and creating podcast episodes. And so it was really interesting to hear about their experiences doing that. They felt that the interviews were great, but then when they got to editing, they're overwhelmed a bit, and so they're trying to deal through that frustration. And so I'm meeting with the different teams, because we call them podcast teams, and talk about what those challenges are and ways I can support them. And that's one way as an educator that you can support students during that kind of moment of frustration. But also the comments are that, well, once we get this edited, we can publish it, because it's going to be, their podcasts are going to be published on the Humanities Division site. And so they're really trying to think about their audience. They're trying to think about what their intentions are, how they're going to frame things. They've learned about podcast genres and different terminology, and they're using that terminology.
Yeah, that's really great to have an authentic assessment where they know that their work is going to have a real audience, beyond just being graded by their professor.
And that's something too that I've heard from a lot of students in their evaluations, as well as when they were commenting. They had to review different humanities and social sciences sites and review them for, what they thought about them. How did it sell them to go into the humanities if they were a prospective student? And I got a lot of students saying, well, I want to see student work, because a lot of the information was just instructors. And so that made me feel kind of validated for creating opportunities for students to make that happen, to add their knowledge to an online space that they can kind of own.
And so you mentioned that they work in podcast teams.
Yes.
And so how many students are on a team?
About 2 to 3. And these were self-selected teams.
Okay.
So the next project that they're going to have, because they have a second project, is their own podcast, which is individual.
Yeah.
But the group, the podcast teams have been really helpful. We've been doing them every week. They have a chance to touch base and things like that. And so it's been kind of, and they've also been able to share their expertise with each other, because some students never have recorded. So having them have this chance to do it as a team, they can learn those skills and they can apply it to their own individual podcast. And it's been really exciting.
Right. And then it also adds that peer-to-peer interaction.
Yes, which is so important. And sometimes, even on hybrid courses, I have felt that sometimes that hybrid aspect can get kind of lost. And so to respond to that loss, I've really tried to integrate more using different modes. So even non-academic, like Twitter, we do use that in my humanities course to sort of reflect on the week each week. And then also doing different mediums, that having students work in different mediums has been really successful. And creating the modules in such a way that they can go there, they can review what we did in the week, they can reflect on it, and then they can apply it.
And so in an online class, what do you use to meet with the podcast team? Like, do you do that through a chat or?
So I haven't had an online class where I've had the podcast teams yet. That's something that I'm looking at in the future once I kind of get a feel for how it is with a hybrid course.
Oh, so you're doing this in a hybrid?
I'm doing a hybrid.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, but I think translating that into an online, a fully online course could be really beneficial, but also very challenging. So I'm hoping that this course will help me figure out what resources students need and what support, and then move in that direction.
That's a good strategy. Okay. So anything else? Any other tools that you find particularly helpful to increase that engagement with students? Like
weekly announcements.
Okay.
I think that's really important. A student actually specifically commented on this, where they really appreciate me doing. So what I do for my hybrid courses is I do a heads up at the beginning of the week, and then I do reflection after we meet. And so the heads up is like, okay, here's what's planned for this week. And then the reflection is, okay, after class, this is what I think about how class went. And then here's some of the things that you need to do to finish off the week. And I've gotten really good feedback from my students on that.
Yeah. So,
in the sense that it keeps them on task.
It keeps them on task. And when you have there's 2 announcements every week at the same time. They know on Monday, say, that they're going to get their heads up announcement. They're starting to look for it at that particular time, and then after class they're looking for the reflection. And so sort of that routine or that pattern definitely is helpful.
And then also for my online course, the announcements I do the heads up for them, and then I do workbook comments at the end of the week. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how I balance the reflection part that's in my hybrid courses.
Right.
And then in addition, whenever I have some sort of all-around comment to their readings, then I will post an announcement just to give them a comment on how I read overall, like how they responded to a particular reading. Because in my online courses, we also use the tool Hypothesis, which is a collaborative annotation tool. And I found this to be really useful for classes that I want to have them annotate together. Because in this way, then they're interacting with the reading in a different way, and they can use that reading as a platform for discussing between each other. And so I ask students to do 1 or 2 comments and then make 2 or 3 comments to others. And so that's been also successful. And those are some ways I just really want to make sure students are engaged, because I really believe that if you have students engaging and participating in your class, they take away a lot more from it.
Yeah, definitely.
And they learn stuff. And then the workbooks, I feel like, are a safe space for a lot of students in the sense that they can interact or kind of work through the material that's challenging, particularly for my 441 students. I have no linguistics background. The textbook that I chose is for people with no linguistics background, so that's great. But they still have to kind of overcome some of the terminology. It's new, and it's a different way of thinking, too, in the sense that social sciences uses APA. How do we merge that with humanities? Because there is a lot of overlap. And for me, as someone that's very interdisciplinary, that overlap's so important.
Right.
And so creating that conversation and having students not only talk about the data, analyze the data, but also talk about how they respond to the data and their background and why that might inform their interpretation of the data.
So it sounds like the workbook is something that you created to sort of supplement the textbook that you've selected for the class, and gives them a chance to interact with the information.
Yeah, and I go through each week, we go through the sections. They have specific questions they have to answer. And they're very targeted, and then they also have like key terms that they have to discuss, they have to put into accessible prose, because I believe that if they cannot communicate what they've learned to a peer that's not in our class, then how are they going to be able to communicate that to me on a paper? And so that's something that I really try to support.
And just technology-wise, I see that you've created the workbook as a Google Doc. And so you have the outline there, and then you just link that into your course.
Yeah, students make a copy, and then they link their copy to me. Yeah. It's been really successful, but it took a lot longer than I thought it would. And very close reading of the textbook, which is important, but I think that sometimes when we're lesson planning, we can get caught up in things. So this actually helped me lesson plan everything from the very beginning.
Yeah, because I'm sure this helped you in sort of going week by week, like as you have in your outline, exactly what activities you want each week and how that's going to fit into the different modules.
Yeah. And it's been successful. That's been the number one thing students in my 441 class have said has been super helpful. In my 357, they've really enjoyed the workbook because we take the workbook exercises and we bring them into class. They're not just disconnected. And so, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great. Anything else that you can think of that we haven't covered? Or?
I think just keep trying to integrate what you can. And if you don't understand something, like if you're trying to work a new tech and you don't understand it, reach out to people like Optus and figure out what you can do. Because it will change your teaching. It's changed mine, and it's made me more effective as an online educator.
And I think it keeps it fresh and exciting.
Yes.
Too, at a pace that you mentioned. So it's not overwhelming, but it's something new each semester that you can kind of work with and add to your toolkit.
It's been really a fun experience, and I look forward to continuing to do so.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. And this has been really informational, and I hope it's helpful to all of you who are listening. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.